really true. Actually, there was some kind of poll in Chicago, and the golden doodle is the most popular dog in Chicago.
Oh,
And and I know it's true because one time I let him out in the yard and it's fenced in and everything, and then I saw him running across the street.
like,
And I thought, oh my God, he's got out. I got to go catch him. I got to go catch him. And I couldn't catch him. I couldn't find him. And I came back and I opened the door and there Pepper was standing there like, oh, where are you been?
what are you doing? Yeah, yeah. Well, when I take my standard poodle out for a walk, people, like, nobody hardly believes there are poodles anymore. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, is that a doodle? I'm like, no, it's a poodle. Right.
Excuse me for a minute. Carl, can you check if we're live? I think we're live.
Yes, you are. We are now. We've been alive for the last 15 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. And we're also on YouTube, but I have that on a different link. Let me let's start the program today. And I apologize for last week. I skipped a week. I had a sewer disaster at my house where, well, it's one of those things you can't, let go. You have to take care of it. Anyway, and I apologize for the short notice last week. I was thought of opening the show today with basically a clip I'm sure everybody here has now read or seen, which is President Biden's press conference on his speech to Congress, on the first 100 days of his administration. And I mean, first off, I think I agree with the wide range of opinions that have been put forward, lots of places, both in the labor movement and civil rights movement and amongst leading members of Congress, and that it was an historic and possibly possibly a game changer of a speech, possibly a masterpiece. We don't know because he was opening the door to opportunities and dangers, and he was being fairly sober, I thought, about the risks of and the opportunities both. And he ended up adopting a more left program in his emphasis and focus, at least, than he ran on. And I would say the distance between his positions and Bernie's, for example, right now are not that important, at least as he articulated them in his speech. And the steps that he has taken, for example, with respect to labor, we don't even know their full potential, except the message is that if there's ever a time in the history of that, for example, I know Scotty and Carl and I have lived through that it was a time to start organizing, it's now. You can't get a better invitation than the leader of your country not only says it, but sets up a commission headed by the vice president, to build it out and develop it. Maybe do things that we have not even yet thought of. I mean, we have been thinking about reform for 75 years in the labor movement, basically as the repeal of Taft-Hartley. I mean, we have a lot of words for it. We have a lot of demand, a lot of quick, and a lot of analysis, but fundamentally that's, we've been going backwards ever since that day in labor, nationally. It's a zigzag. There's been ups and downs. I'm not trying to say it's just completely linear, but there's no question. I mean, the map of membership shows it, and the map of concentration of wealth shows it. So for him to take this approach now, I assume, since I count Joe Biden as a bourgeois liberal in a way, but also a social democrat. At least he was certainly a social democrat when he was making his speech the other night. And, so that that raises a big question. He can call for it, and the leadership can say there's no other way to address the inequalities in this nation than among one thing, the chief thing, is to increase the power of working people through an expanded and empowered labor movement. Now that's an opportunity that we have not heard since the 30s. And I'm not sure. And now we have an opportunity to envision what is it meant by democracy. And I thought that President Biden's most powerful message in his whole speech, there's many aspects to it, I know other people may have been touched by other things, was we have to prove, because of what's happened, we have to prove that democracy can work. And that's the question I was going to put forward today. You know, democracy has a lot of different meanings to people. But for example, in most parlance in the United States, it means, oh, we have a two-party system. China has a one-party system. Cuba has a one-party system. Russia has, well, it actually has more than one party now. It's not a one-party system anymore.
3 parties.
And we have countries with 4 and 5 parties that have enough influence to hold seats in their legislatures and ministries. And we have, the two-party system. And but we can tell from the last 60 years that having a two-party system is not a guarantee of democracy that has any meaning in any real economic or empowerment terms by itself, because we've gotten poorer since 72. The working class has gotten poorer since 72, both relatively and absolutely. If you discount inflation, and their share of their economy is the worst it's ever been. So we have, so that's that kind of, we can't accept that is democracy can be possible with that level of differences in power and in the means of life, which in a capitalist society is money. So how do we address the question of democracy? What does it really mean? You know, what is there a foundation of national unity in the United States that can make a democracy that means something to us, to the vast majority of people? What makes that happen? Is it a one party? Is the government of China more or less accountable to its people than the government of the United States? None of us can actually answer that question, I'm sure. But there's no real evidence to say that it's less responsive than ours. And nobody can make that argument, in my view, without arrogance, unless they're part of the culture of that country. Then we can exercise, we know how democratic our country is. We know that. We've had experiences of it on different levels. So I just wanted to open the discussion today with what is democracy, and a related question. Can you have a democracy and a legalized party that has the politics of the Confederacy, namely the Republican Party? Can you have is that possible? I mean, can you go forward? Will we be able to compete in the world, or will we be able to solve any of our problems if that party remains and contends for power? My own answer is no, but open the floor. Anybody want to take on this question of what do we have to do to save our democracy? Tina.
Yeah. So, sorry. Yeah. So I don't use the term democracy a lot, and so, but as you know, I'm really interested in messaging and rhetoric, and like what is the exact message that reaches our people. And so you have me now thinking about the term democracy, because the way I talk about what you're talking about, I talk about often, but I usually talk about it in terms of what is the purpose of government and what is the purpose of society, which is like the purpose of society is to organize people and groups of people in a way that serves human needs, you know, and social needs. And so I'm just kind of thinking out loud. You have me now thinking about what the term democracy means to the people around me here in Western PA. And if perhaps it might be useful for me to add that concept in to when I talk about government. Because when I think about democracy, I think about all the people around me who are really involved in rebuilding the Democratic Party here. We had a big, strong Democratic Party. We became a swing county when the steel mills closed down, and our Democratic Party was destroyed by a scandal. A state leader, our state representative leader was crashed by a scandal, and then the Republican Party kind of took over, and now we're rebuilding the Democratic Party. So the people who are rebuilding the Democratic Party are thinking about democracy, but they're only thinking about it in electoral terms. And so my role has been to bring the concept of Medicare for all to them, you know, the concept of having issues-based electoral work, which like kind of is more than they can hope for. So I'm just thinking out loud that I think maybe I should think about, and I'll be listening closely about what democracy means and how to build it into this cognitive framework I've built.
Who wants to go next?
I have a thing I've been studying lately, and it might sound kind of weird and abstract, but I've been studying John C. Calhoun. I just finished another book on him, his theories. And what I think about our quote unquote democracy is that it's really much more in tune with Calhoun's theories than we would like to admit. Calhoun's theory was, he had several of them. One of them was the theory of the concurrent majority. And he opposed it to just a numerical majority. And the idea was that you had to structure government in such a way that the rights of substantial minorities were protected, and even in some ways given a veto power. And when you think about our government, the structure of it, it's everywhere there. The fact that we have two houses, a House of Representatives and a Senate. Well, what's the Senate's role? The Senate's role is to create a barrier to the numerical majority and add to it a counterweight of acreage and give weight to the acreage of a given state. And then there's the Supreme Court with its lifelong rules that also weights it towards the elite. A lot of the different, the lack of a federal right to vote, the fact that each state gets to determine the right to vote in very often very restrictive ways, and so on and so on. So all of these serve to structure the American government in a way that it gives a kind of veto to significant minorities. And we, in the most trivial sense, we can see it in the Electoral College, in the sense that, you know, the last couple of presidents have, you know, Republican presidents have lost the majority vote, and in the filibuster, which also gives a super majority to the Senate of 60 to 40. So this is the thinking of John C. Calhoun reflected today in our government history, the concurrent majority, and his fear of numerical majority. Felt if we did have a one person, one vote, and universal suffrage, that his elites would be outnumbered and eventually eroded. So that's an important thing to study, think about in terms of our own democracy. David Schweikert uses a brief term to describe it in one of his books. He just says it's a dollarocracy. It's more based on $1, one vote than it is on one person, one vote. Now, given that, I still, think we need to defend bourgeois democracy because it's better than the alternative, which that we do have a restricted right to vote, that we do have restricted rights to free speech, and we need to defend them. And because we need to be able to fight on the terrain of a government, and we can't do that without certain rights.
Anybody else want to take on the general question here?
Yeah, well, I'll make a point. I just watched a documentary, a new documentary, biography of Adolf Hitler. And one of the reasons that is interesting to me is because, when Hitler came to power, it was in the time of the Weimar Republic. And the Weimar Republic was one of the most democratic of bourgeois democratic democracies on the planet. It had all kinds of incredible support for labor, for minorities, all kinds of stuff. And yet, and the thing that I think is relevant to Trump in this is, and the situation of democracy for us here now, is that Hitler tried to come to power 2 times before he actually made it under the same conditions. And he didn't make it the first time, he didn't make it, but he made it the 3rd time. And if you look at Trump's base and the fact that they're still, planning to run again and all of that kind of stuff, I think it's something that we have to look at. And I totally agree with Carl. I mean, bourgeois democracy is the ground we're fighting on right now, and we have to be ready to fight it even more. That's it.
Yeah, it's the ground on which we're fighting. But my question is it failing? Because we have these global challenges. Take climate change alone is enough of a challenge that's going to, one way or another, via unending disasters that cost more than states or local can possibly raise to deal with. There's going to be a need for collaboration, for national unity to succeed in that effort. The same is true now in the division of the world related to as one of the outcomes of the pandemic, where the global South, is deeply into the pandemic. They're nowhere near out of it, and other economies are going to start to improve, like ours, because we have the vaccines, more of the vaccines. So this gross inequality in the world is not going to go away, and it's going to. We're not going to, like the president says, I want to compete against China. Well, that's fair. That's fair. And that would be a great thing. But are you going to compete with the level of division that you have in the country right now? And can you, redefine what do we mean? What does it mean to be an American? What's the mission? The Chinese government. My friend Joe Sims, has, he argues with me about this, and he says, because he's very much leans against the idea of a single party system on the ground. One of the arguments he made was very interesting. It was on the grounds that if you do that, then all the politics of the country will gravitate toward whatever that party is. Okay, because it's the game in town, right? You want to get elected to office, you want to set up services, you want to do public works, you want to do whatever. Everybody's in it, or they're not in it at all. Okay, and so you can see how well. Okay, that would bring the politics of the whole country into your party. It could. That could happen, right? And maybe depending on your level of development and the number and the relationship of classes in your country, you can see where that could be an insuperable issue. A lot would depend on the national culture, it's there, right? What its tolerance for division was, or what its traditions. A country that's 5,000 years old has a lot of traditions. Okay, a country that's 300, 400, 500 years old, a little different, So, is it failing right now? And what needs to be done about the danger? For example, you're in the Weimar Republic, Scott, in whatever it is, in the 20s, and the devastation of the World War, the whole thing, right? The feeling of grievance going everywhere, and the democratic process can't manage it. It fails. And you can look at a lot of different unity of the labor movement. Between social democrats and communists, for example, was a factor, right? There were lots of factors in it, but at some level, the system is either working or not, or you're headed into a crisis that is structural in some way, and that the existing institutions, they're flailing about, but they're not getting it done. That's the I don't see how we can get out of this with the Republican Party as big as it is and in the position it's in.
Well, I think you're right about the Republicans. So I call them these days the new Confederates. And it's true not only in regard to their racialized programs, but also in terms of their geographic base. Even though they're everywhere, they're concentrated in the states of the old Confederacy and in the Indian killing states of the West. And they even fly the Confederate flag when in their mass rallies and so on, along with the Trump flags and the American flag, which gives you a kind of indication of where they were at, and the fact that they are a new Confederacy. I don't think there's much compromise with them. I think they just have to be defeated, and they have to be defeated piece by piece, starting at the local level and on up. And perhaps we can see a split, in which case some, libertarian type anti-fascist Republicans will form some kind of new kind of political instrument. But for the time being, I think our job is simply to defeat them, and that they are the target of the main blow. We can criticize Biden when he goes wrong, and should support him where he goes right. But right now, the main blow is to defeat as many Republicans as possible. That will open up space, because there's two ways of defeating him. You can defeat him by strengthening the elites within the Democratic Party, and you can defeat him by strengthening the grassroots of the Democratic Party. Cena is very much part of the latter, and PDA and the Working Families Party and other alliances and clusters around those groups. So that's the anti-hegemonic bloc that has to be built. There's one very interesting thing I discovered yesterday, is that the Hewlett-Packard Corporation, which is rather large and powerful, has just started to set aside $50 million to come up with a replacement theory for neoliberalism. And then they explicitly put it in those terms. They said neoliberalism is no longer useful or helpful, and they've dedicated $50 million to different think tanks and professors and whatnot to come up with a new theory for capitalism to guide us through the next period. So that should tell you something right there. That there is a terrain, a battle going on in the terrain and how to define the politics of the country. And I'm using Rainbow Social Democracy for the name of our grouping that we want to strengthen. And other people can come up with their own. The New the New Confederates is another good name for our opposition.
Yeah, I think that one thing that we haven't mentioned yet is the cultural aspect of defeating the Republican Party right now. Because I remember back in my childhood when it was culturally unacceptable to be racist, outwardly racist anymore. And so all of the men in my family had to put the N-word to bed. And when they tried to use it, and I threw temper tantrums about it, because it was culturally unacceptable and they knew it, instead of getting beaten up and put down, the aunts made them shut up so we could have family meals. And I think that, so what that taught me from my childhood is that the most egregious racists have to be isolated. And they have to be demonized so they cannot attract the young anymore. And I think that Biden's policies, that's why I'm fighting so hard for the policies right now, because we have to have a material basis for that cultural change. And also, we're doing a study group on Ryan Grimm's book. We've got people, and we're on the chapter about Rahm Emanuel and how Rahm Emanuel sort of mobilized toxic masculinity and fundraising to build his career and make himself look more successful than he was, because if you look at his record closely, he was not that successful. And so, and that just makes me think about, and then the next chapter is about the what was then called like the gay rights movement, which has in our lifetime morphed into the LGBTQ plus movement. And I think that that culturally is very important for us to open up possibilities for the young that are more attractive than what the Republicans are offering them. And if we add to that broadband, childcare, college education, that I think that's how we win the cultural struggle that will be reflected in the political struggle.
Yeah, I agree with that. I wanted to raise a thing about the South because I think, being an old Southerner and all, I got to get into this. The South has become a battleground in a good way on a lot of these issues. And there is, I'll tell you, our organization is growing fast in the South. We're bringing in members, and part of it's through labor. I think people probably know about the Southern Workers Assembly and the stuff that they're doing and the labor organizing that's going on throughout the South. And I also always want to remind people about the history of the South, that even at the worst point of the Confederacy, there were organized groups, even during the war, who fought the Confederacy from the inside. Every single state had some kind of guerrilla movement or basically guerrilla movement that was fighting the Confederacy. And in fact, the one in Mississippi played a huge role in paving the way for Sherman. And there was, that was an incredible alliance, because it was Native Americans who understood the swamp country and was able to create space for them to assemble and get together and be safe and do their things. And they also, there were runaway Confederate soldiers, deserters, people that opposed slavery to begin with, and there were some in the South. And anyway, those people all came together to do that all across the South. And I have to say that I also want to remind people that that tradition carried on long after the Civil War too. One of my mentors in the movement, Reverend Claude Williams, and I don't know if people have seen his book, A Faith to, well, it's not his book, but Cedric Belfridge wrote a biography of him called A Faith to Free the People, which is really an interesting book about what was going on during that period in the South. And one of the things that he did is he and a Black reverend started the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, which united white and Black tenant farmers. And there were white tenant farmers. And it was illegal, and you could be lynched for having joint meetings back then. And so they found a way to go way out in the woods where nobody would find them to have their meetings and stuff. And it became a very powerful force for making some of the changes that took place later on. Anyway, I think it's always important to note that this kind of stuff as fight for real democracy takes place under the worst of conditions.
I agree. When I saw the movie The Free State of Jones,
Yeah.
I thought of myself. I said, I wonder if it existed anywhere else. So I looked at all of it, and I found a half a dozen places. There was one called The Free State of Winston.
Right.
And, all across the place, you found all these similar kinds of undercurrent to the Confederacy, the anti-CSA hegemonic strongholds that were taking place. So I agree. The South is a very important battleground.
On that subject, let me ask a question related to democracy, which would be, what should the outcome of Merrick Garland's investigation into systematic racism in the Minneapolis Police Department, let's assume that it's going to find presence of systematic racism. What should be the remedy?
Well, first of all, I mean, you asked. I would say one thing is to purge the worst of them. In Chicago, we had, in my police district, in the district where I live, we had a KKK clavern existing inside the police headquarters. So some of them just have to be purged. The other is more difficult. I'm not a police abolition guy, because I think we're going to even have police departments under socialism. But you have to change the mentality. You have to find police officers who do not have embedded in their consciousness fear of the black brute, which is a core theme of white supremacy that's been fed to the American people since the beginning. Fear of the black brute, and it becomes something that has to be realized. First of all, you can't fight it if you don't realize that it exists, and second of all, you have to find ways to curb it in the way you train and educate people, because that's why a lot of these cops, if they pulled over a white guy, they wouldn't bother pulling out their guns right away, or at least not in as many cases. But because of this fear of the white brute that they've got settled between their ears, they pull their gun out, and they're fearful of the black brute, and they pull the trigger. So I think that's a re-education camp for the police forces is something in order. We can call it something else, but that's what it's going to be.
Oh my God, we'll have a delegation, protesting or doing forced labor. But anybody else?
Called a Truth and Reconciliation Study Center. How's that?
Good one. Good one. Yeah, I'll make a quick point. I think that Garland's thing is opening the door I mean, some of the suggestions that have come out there is like this idea that everybody, that they want to do background checks on military people and who are applying to the police force and others to see if they have ever been around white supremacist organizations or stuff like that. And I think that's a very important step, and I'm really glad they're doing that. And you know, I think the other thing is that a lot of focus, more and more focus is coming forward that the people that police should live in the neighborhood, kind of thing, and making that a requirement. And I think that's a big step forward too, where it would just change a whole lot of things. And I'm trying to remember, it has been used in some places, and it's been very healthy from what I understand.
John?
Yeah, go ahead,
Yeah.
Steve.
Two things. Well, a friend of mine, one of the guys I work with, worked as a Detroit cop for 20 years. His father and his sister were in the department. A couple things he said. One was that, you know, even when Detroit had a mandatory policy where the police had to live in the city, they had a section, 2 sections of the neighborhood, basically called Copper Alley, where they all lived. You still had a lot of repression. In Detroit, you had all kinds of different squads that were existing. So that in itself didn't stop the kind of brutality you saw. But what he said was that in the recent period, they did away with that. And so now they're getting people that apply to the police department that maybe live 30, 40 miles away, all white neighborhoods. And I see it where I work too. When you see a lot of workers who maybe used to live close to the city of Detroit, but now they live 40, 50 miles away, smaller white areas, and the thinking changes. And what he said was, with these police departments that come in, they come in with a mentality of cowboys, and that they don't see themselves as solving problems as opposed to kind of confrontation. And it also gets many of them hurt. You know, they get to be wild that way. So that's one thing in terms of, I think, how you view the police departments. They like Scotty said, and was said before, they need to have a much closer understanding of who comes in. But also there needs to be a national registry. It should be one and done. If you get any kind of disciplinary action that puts you out of one police department, you shouldn't be allowed to go to another. Because we saw that happen in Detroit. A guy got kicked out of the department, went to a suburban department, and a year later he beat up a guy, almost killed him, and those kinds of things exist. The bigger picture to me is that how we look, you talk about democracy, and I think democracy has to be really reflecting of what people want. What do people need? What do they want? That's what democracy at its essence to me means. And I think what most people want from their police is fairness and competency. I mean, so when we talk about democracy in the police departments, that's what I think people want. Is they want a competent and a fair and a just police department. And then that's kind of the start. At least that's kind of how I see it. Thanks.
How do you stop? How do you get justice in poverty too? I mean, if you're going to have a police force that is trying to maintain a, let's say, no robbery law in a town where people don't have enough to eat, your mission is doomed. I mean, if you're looking for a harmonious community, it's not going to happen. It can't happen. So somehow, it seems to me that you can't. And furthermore, when people get money in their pocket, I think the data is universal. It generates less crime until you get $1 million in your pocket. Then a whole nother crime, starts. Okay, but. But down at the bottom there, I mean, you could probably solve, 90% of the criminal activity that needs to be sanctioned if everybody had enough money in their pocket. Not all of it, but, some. So And I think that in a way, asking, I mean, you put cops in a weird situation, right? Because where the temptations from the worst elements or the worst, the people are the enemy. The people are my adversary. I am not their servant. I am an adversary, because most of the time I spend with people who are, like I had a good friend who was in Los Angeles who was uh, worked with the LAPD a long time, and there wasn't a single detective in the Hollywood division. That's where he worked as an electronic tech. There wasn't a single detective in the Hollywood division that did not have the philosophy that everybody lies all the time. Everybody is lying except you and me and my brother.
Like Dr. House on TV.
Yeah,
Everybody lied. I think, soon after I moved back to Beaver County, I came across, I was in a position to talk with our DA at the time, our district attorney, or the county attorney. And he was something of a liberal. So I asked him, what, did he understand the correlation between levels of unemployment, levels of crime? He laughed out loud. He said, Carl, I have a chart on my wall. This shows exactly that. And he says, I pointed out to everybody who comes in there. He said, but, if you really wanted to go down, he said, the answer is full employment. So I think one of the interesting things about Biden's speech is that we are now on the cusp of being able to come something close to a full employment economy.
Tina.
Mm-hmm.
Unmute, Tina.
Sorry. I think it's important when we put the cops in the neighborhoods that we don't hatch-act them. Just like our social workers should not be hatch-act. Because the people who are on the front lines of dealing with problems of poverty should be able to become activists. And I'm thinking of Matewan and the sheriff in Matewan. Like, anything we can do to create that dynamic where our armed protectors are connected to our community, it's probably a way to go, I think.
I agree. I'm pretty down on the Chicago Police Department. I lived with it too long, going back to when they murdered Fred Hampton. But I also, I had my eyes wide open, and I discovered a small group of cops. They were black cops. They weren't the Afro-American Patrolmen's Association, which was a good group. They were a smaller group. They rode around Cabrini Green homes on their bicycles, and they used to, be doing all sorts of things with the kids. So I got a chance to talk to one of them once because I was doing some community technology stuff, and he said that he thought the using the bikes with the kids was. He said they taught the kids bike tricks. They competed on different things. They played back. He says these sports don't do that much in and of themselves. He says, but the longer you're playing basketball, the less time there is for you to do something else. Getting into trouble. So that was part of their idea of the solution. That the police had to be more engaged with these kind of alternative activities for young people, especially in communities which were very stressed and very poor.
That's how I raised my boys. Keep them busy.
That's right. Keep them busy.
Man, that reminds me of Don Tormey's rules for organizers. How do you get to be a great organizer, Don? Find something for everybody to do and don't leave anybody behind.
Good.
That was his.
Just on the Chicago Police Department, it's also an example of where you have to look for allies wherever you can, because we actually, and for obvious reasons, I'm not going to go into this in detail, but we have a member who's in the Chicago Police Department, and he actually provides some very interesting ideas about things that we should be working on.
Right.
So see what you can do there.
There are a number.
There are, yes.
Yeah. I want to get back to the original question John raised of democracy. Um, I'm a big fan of John Dewey, believe it or not. Most people, tend to treat him lightly. In terms of his politics were kind of flaky, but his philosophy was actually very deep. But he came up with, I thought, two important elements of democracy early on, and he was debating it in the 1920s. He actually debated it in China at Beijing University in Mao Zedong. I went to one of his lectures. But he said there are two things. One, you need an educated citizenry, what he called the public citizen. And secondly, it was a matter of mass participation. He coined the term participatory democracy. And that was the definition of democracy. He put it up in a polemic he was doing with Walter Lippmann at the time, who was trying to argue that, well, democracy is contending elites. If you had contending elites in a society and their job was to keep everybody else passive, so you wouldn't have a mob. So that was his, so Dewey took the opposite side of the argument. And I think it's a very good one, a very good standard to uphold the idea of an educated public citizenry and being able to participate in all the decisions at all levels.
I think that's an important aspect of the question of the way systemic racism is being discussed now, because people are more and more looking at how do you, including in the Biden administration, how do you mitigate poverty? How do you mitigate, people living in racist conditions and stuff like that? And I think the whole issue of systemic racism really contributes to what you're talking about there. I think that's an important step forward. I wanted to say one other thing about democracy in China. I've been there a bunch of times, and actually one of my daughters was educated there. But one of the things that when I met with people in the party there are very strong debates within the structure of the party there. And for example, there was a huge debate about whether to allow US corporations into China at one point, because they, and there was also huge debate, which is really ongoing, about how to integrate people. Well, let me put it a different way. If you have a small business in China and you want to basically sell things in a competitive way, can you do that and stuff like that? There's a whole lot of debates about, and there are debates about what the role of the party should be, whether the party should be involved in some things or should stay out of some things. And I think it's a real healthy debate that's going on there, which means that, this can happen within a one-party system too.
I think it would depend on if you have a certain break in your history. We had an opportunity, for example, after the Civil War, and these are hard things to judge, and I'm not making any judgment. Lincoln had an opportunity after the Civil War to do what the abolitionists wanted, which was basically to hang the Confederate officers all the way from Washington to Richmond, all right, along their highway. And, at Appomattox, Lincoln chose not to do that, that the country was exhausted with war. And, he made the famous speech on that subject that has stayed with us. And in a certain sense, a similar challenge was I think, presented to the both Deng Xiaoping and the current Xi Jinping, about the criticism of the Mao parts of the Mao era, especially the Cultural Revolution, in which many people either suffered or perished, more than took place in the Civil War, actually. And he had an interesting response to that. And it was part of his criticism of the Soviet Khrushchev thing about the criticism of Stalin. Actually, it was in that context. And he says, if you criminalize, your own country and your own leadership, then you risk, rendering a permanent division in the society. And it says that regardless of the mistakes that of the Mao area, that were made, principally equating socialism with poverty. I think those were his words. The revolution would never have happened without Mao's leadership. Would never have happened. You'd have been debating with a decrepit monarchy, and rather than a bunch of people made a revolution, and it turned out they didn't know exactly how to go, so they did the best they can, and trial and error led to the discovery of that socialists could run a market economy or a mixed economy better than capitalists could. And they have proven that. They have demonstrated that. Don't have to worry about the ideology. And the most powerful argument you can make is, and that have raised their people, faster than any other country in history. And they continue, even this past quarter, doing it. Okay, so that means that there's a possibility there. How it culturally plays out in different countries, I mean, whether you have multi-party systems or single-party systems, is probably not the main question. But what the main question has to be is you have to have a national concord. You have to have a arena of a mission that embraces the overwhelming majority of the people. And I think if you have that, then it doesn't matter so much what the debates might be because economic development will mean for many years that there are class differentiations in society. I don't care. You can start nationalizing 60% of it. The 40% that remain is they're going to have a division of labor. It's going to happen. But you can work your way along the path toward, take Obama's slogan, a more perfect union. And take Xi Jinping's slogan, a harmonious and moderately prosperous society. Those things aren't in principle in conflict.
I think one thing to keep in mind is, the Chinese flag has one big star and four little ones on it. And a lot of people don't know what that means. It means the one big star is the Communist Party, and it's the ruling party. The four little stars are for four separate minor parties. These parties, are just small clusters of people at this point, but they're part of the government, and they're part of the government through a piece of the government that a lot of people don't know about. It's called the Chinese People's Political Consultative Conference, and it meets once a year, once every on a regular basis, and it co-ops and brings in these minor parties that represent points of view that are not Marxist. So what it represents for the Chinese people is the United Front. The party does not rule alone. The party rules through a united front. And the United Front includes a lot of people who are not Marxists. And so that's what this instrument represents. Also, the Chinese People's Congress. Not everybody in the Chinese People's Congress is a communist. They're elected there. Most of them are, but some of them are not. And again, it represents the idea that if you really want to successfully govern China, the Chinese, in a way, have come up with their own version of Gramsciism, that they can't exercise hegemony alone. They have to bring in different parts of civil society, even if they have a strong interest in all of those parts, and bring them together to build a national consensus, which becomes, expressed as, the different 5-year plans and so on. But John's right. If they fail, they lose the mandate of heaven. And that is a disaster. So right now, the Chinese Communist Party enjoys the mandate of heaven. It has a popularity among the Chinese population that, that would make Donald Trump and Joe Biden blush in envy. It's above high 70s, I think. There are different forms of democracy, and sometimes they're more complicated than what we're told about them superficially.
Just one thing about the debates within the party, and there really are some very strong debates within the party. One of them is about getting the U.S. monopolies out of China. There is a huge segment of the party that says that, people think, they're always talking about, what is it, the ideas that they steal from these corporations, that, they learn technology that they didn't earn or something like that. And the truth of the matter is that the U.S. is using these corporations to steal all kinds of technical information from China. For example, some of the stuff on battery technology that they have, which is way ahead of what the U.S. has, and the U.S. has been spying and trying to steal those ideas. But anyway, I do think it really is all the things that Carl says, but it also within the party, there's big debates, and I think that's a real important thing. Oh, I just wanted to make one other point too. When people talk about, and I get into this in the labor movement all the time, people say, "Oh, China this, keep it made in America," without thinking about the fact that some of the biggest employers in China are U.S. corporations, taking advantage of low wages and all of that kind of stuff. So that's another side of it that people don't think about in terms of, China.
Tina, you want to close this out?
Let me share my screen a minute.
Oh, okay. We'll do that first. What are you sharing?
I want to show you something.
Oh, do I have to make you co-host?
Yeah, make me a co-host. Or sharing screen privileges or whatever.
There you go. You're co-host now. So
okay, good.
Okay, there you go.
We just published a new book, a collection of essays of debates within the Chinese Communist Party and in and around the Chinese Party, accounts of its history from people in the United States and from people in China. So it's very good. You will not find a view that China is just another imperialist power and we need to overthrow it. That is not in there. But there is all the stuff that Scott has been referring to, and other stuff about the debates within and around the party. And some of the articles are by Chinese people who represent different parts of that debate as well. And then there's obviously articles by some of us in it too. So anyway, I highly recommend it.
Oh, well, it couldn't come with a better endorsement, Carl. There you go.
All right.
Tina,
I wrote it down.
Good.
I have it right in my house. Last time
Okay.
we were for lunch, he brought it.
Yeah, brought by your co-sponsor, the Open co-publisher is the Online University of Left. So we're your co-sponsor. So it's legit for us to do an ad on your show.
Right. I think that the question of democracy and unity is really important. And just looking at China culturally recently really pointed out to me the difference between having a culture that's rooted on its land for centuries, or I don't know, like many, many centuries, how different that is from living in a culture, a settler culture that came to a country and attempted genocide in order to be seated on the land. And then also add to that slavery. And it's a hard thing to bring white people to face that. And I think that a lot of what we're going to have to do to get to the unity of democracy is figure out a process to help more white people be able to face the trauma of their heritage. And that's a hard thing. I mean, I have trouble with it. I have trouble facing my heritage because it just makes me not want to get out of bed. So I think we should also like realize what we're asking of people too.
The truth will make us free. That's what
Yeah, but first it makes you
might make you uncomfortable along the way.
right. I mean, some people have to walk away. We're asking some people to walk away from their entire families. I mean, I did that as a teenager. So like, it's a serious thing we're facing here in this country.
It sure is. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. By the way, if you have suggestions about guests or topics, just send it out on the list that I send out, and or just reply to it, and we'll do what we can. Okay.
I'll see if I can get Fletcher to join us.
Yeah, please get him off of his.
Yeah, that'd be great.
That'd be wonderful.
He has a great interview in the current monthly review. Him and Bill Gallegos talking to Fernando Gaspin on labor, on Fernando's labor history, which is mixed in with the Chicano national movement as well. It's absolutely fascinating.
It is good.
All right.
It would be worth having a session, by the way, on rank and file unionism.
Yeah.
Sure.
All right. So we'll see what we can come up with.
Whatever Biden is going to do legally, and God help him, I bless him, in order for the unions, most of whose organizing budgets are, bordering on zero in a lot of different unions, you're going to have a powerful rank and file movement, to spark it and to get it going. True in the 30s, and it's going to be true now. So
right. And the PRO Act is immense. I briefly read it over. There's a lot in that.
And I think finding ways to take initiative, action that can, because you don't know. I mean, you know just from the level of strike activity that's spiked up in the past 5 years, basically. Okay. So
and organizing activity.
And organizing activity, that the pressure in these workplaces has got to be huge. And after the pandemic, I mean, people have got to be crying. Okay, so they are. And so, if you get the right weapons and the right tools in the hands of time, then when the explosion can happen, I mean, it can be, it won't be like the 30s. It'll be something totally different, but it's going to explode. We know this. You look at the inequalities, it's going to explode one way or the other. And so I think at the base, that determines what really happens. If it hadn't been for TUUL and TUEL, the CIO would have had a much harder road. Okay, it would have happened anyway eventually, but it would have had a much tougher road without that. So I think we should figure out a way to take advantage of that, since the president has opened the door and said, time to join the union.
Just on that point, I want to add another book that I think is really important in this discussion. I don't know if people have seen it yet or not. Lane Wyndham has a book called Roll the Union On. And it's the story, basically, of the rank and file movements and the things like 9 to 5, mass movements out that were headed in a labor direction, but weren't actually unions. It's really powerful about what happened in the 60s, and all of us are old enough on this thing to remember a lot of the things that they're talking about, but it's a real reminder of how things can explode when the time is right and stuff, and how much we gained out of those fights from the 60s.
Anyway, okay, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care. Have a good day.
Okay.
Thank you. Great show.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Take care. See you next week. And it's May Day. Mayday, solidarity forever.